she begged. I said no. The hospital found someone to stay, and I found the limit I'd been running on. I remember the exact light in my bedroom when the phone rang, the kind of pale, stubborn sunrise that leaks through cheap blinds. I wasn't supposed to answer. It was my day off, the kind of day you cling to like oxygen after 6 12-hour shifts in a row. I had plans that barely skirted the category non-negotiable: sleep. A beginner's yoga class I'd booked out of guilt and curiosity, lunch with my sister, and a long overdue clean that would make my apartment feel less like a staging area, more like a place to breathe. My phone shouted Rachel across the screen. She wasn't someone from my inner circle. We'd been polite at work for 2 years, rules and rituals exchanged in the hallways, smiles while charting, a coffee machine camaraderie that disappeared when our shifts ended. Rachel Pierce was 34, steady in the way nurses had to be, the kind who knew when to calm a family down and when to page a doctor. She was sobbing, she said, but it came out chopped and raw. My dad, he had a heart attack. He's in the ICU. I have to go. I can't find anyone to cover my 727. Her voice sounded small and far away, as if she was in a hallway and someone else was holding it for her. I've called everyone, she said between gulps. They all said no. Please, Elle, if I don't get coverage, they'll mark me as a no-call, no-show. I can't lose this job. My dad, he might not make it. Everything in me folded into that moment. Nurses get these calls in different flavors, the "my kid is sick" and the "my car broke down," and rare and bright with panic, the "my parent is dying." It's the kind of plea that obligates on a moral level that has nothing to do with policy, union rules, or who scheduled whom. I felt my mouth go dry. I'm so sorry, I said, because what else do you say? I'm sorry about your dad, Rachel. I'm so sorry. She started begging then, words tumbling faster than breath. I could hear the car keys dropped on the floor, the paper rustle of one hand flipping through a wallet. Please. You have days off. ... Please. I can't get there and be here. Please. I imagined myself bursting into the unit in jeans, hair up my body saying the words, but my mind lagging. I imagined the way my hands felt on night 12 of nothing but quick notes in 4 lines. I felt the soreness in my shoulders, the narrowness of my patience, the tremor that sometimes came after a stretch of shifts in those rare seconds, made me feel like I might nick someone with a comment I didn't mean. I can't, I said. The words felt like an anchor. Not because I didn't want to help, I did, because something in my chest was sore and true. I'd worked 6 12-hour shifts. I was bone tired. I'd planned this day in my head as a small and exact thing, a way to hold myself together. If I canceled now, there would be no patch to stitch in later. There would only be more exhaustion, more edges fraying. I had to keep my promise to myself for one day. I've been working a lot, I said, stuttering for the honesty to land without cruelty. I can't. I'm sorry, Rachel. I'm so sorry. I hope your dad is okay, she cried louder. There was a noise I recognized, the kind that sits in the chest when someone's world leans sideways. Please, she said. Then she hung up. I lay on the bed in the quiet afterward like someone who had been given a test and got the answer wrong. Selfish popped through with needles of discomfort. I wanted to call every person who had ever said no to her, to beg, to force a coverage chain that would spare her the reprimand. But I didn't. I stayed in bed, closed my eyes, and let myself be the small human who needed rest. Later at work the next day, I learned she had called out after all. She got a write-up. Someone had to pick up a double. Someone got mandated in and was furious. The unit had that tight, metallic air you get when a schedule collapses and everyone knows who was here and who was not. I sat at the nurse's station, trying to make notes, and felt like I was being watched through a screen. Co-workers whispered. Someone said, loud enough for me to hear, "Must be nice to be so heartless," another muttered. "I can't believe you wouldn't help during a family emergency." My manager pulled me aside later and said, "Gently and like a knife, Elena, you're not required to work on your days off." But it would have been team player behavior to help out, given the situation. That's the moment things stopped being simple. In a job where the default is giving and replicating care, refusing even for rest reads like betrayal. At 32, I'd done the math enough to know what my body would give up without boundaries. My boyfriend Marcus texted mid-afternoon. "You okay? Everyone going in on you?" He thought I should have gone. "Family emergency," he wrote. "That's different." My best friend Leah, also a nurse, called and said, "You did nothing wrong. You can't live on call for other people's emergencies." The unit hummed on, but the hum had a flinch in it. I could feel eyes through the plexiglass. My friend Jonah, who floated between med-surg and telemetry, gave me a sideways look that read like a math problem. You owed the team X units of extra labor, and you didn't pay. Later, Nina, the nurse who had been mandated to stay, passed me in the hallway, and her face was a small stone. She didn't speak. She didn't have to at lunch, a pile of tidy faces for patients. I sat in the break room and stared at a coffee cup. People kept bringing the subject up in low, cat-call voices that cooled into judgment. I heard snippets. "I understand people have limits, but... What if it had been you?" "True, but it's a family emergency." I replayed the call over and over in the cold light of analysis. Rachel's voice had been bright with terror. Her father had been her world. Losing him would be a catastrophe. It wasn't trivial. It wasn't manipulative. It was raw, and I had said no. But there were practical reasons behind my refusal. I've inhaled the kind of burnout that keeps you from being useful to anyone. I know what fatigue does to my hands when I hold an IV. I know that mistakes happen when the brain is a sieve. I've seen colleagues make errors on straight days after nights of double shifts. It's part ethical, we owe safety to the patients, and part selfish for survival. Still, the team didn't need my internal calculus. They saw a mother in crisis and a coworker who declined. In the moral algebra of the unit where compassion is currency, I had failed to pay. How did you turn the argument that I can't into "I had to"? That night, my manager pulled me into her office with a closeness that felt like a countermove. "Look, I get it," she said, "but these situations are messy. We're short-staffed, budgets are tight. The expectation here is that people cover for each other when the stakes are high." She didn't say heartless. She didn't need to. Her eyebrows did the same work. I left the office with a piece of paper, coffee cup, and a plan. I am not someone who escalates to HR lightly. I don't like formal battles, but whispers that swim into policy need a surface. I decided to respond with something simple, clarity and a little empathy. I wrote a brief email to my manager. "Thank you for discussing this with me today. I wanted to re-emphasize that I was scheduled off and had already worked 6 consecutive 12-hour shifts. My decision was based on fatigue and safety concerns. I fully acknowledge Rachel's emergency and hope for her father's recovery. I'd be willing to explore ways to better structure emergency coverage so the team isn't left choosing between compassion and safety." I hit send and felt like I'd thrown a decent rope into a river. It was practical. It showed empathy. It also laid down a barrier. The next morning, Rachel avoided breaking eye contact with everyone, but never with me. She walked by my station as if I had become an invisible fence. I left a sticky note on her locker. "Thinking of you. Hope he's okay?" She didn't respond. People noticed. Some took that as performative. Some took it as cold. I couldn't make them read the motive in my handwriting. Then came the mandated nurse's voice. The one I heard in the hallway like a thrown stone. "Nina found me near the med cart. You know, someone got stuck with a double because of this, right?" Her words were blunt, edged with fatigue and resentment. "Your call meant we had to force someone to stay." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. I didn't want that to happen." "Sorry doesn't unyoke an extra 12 hours, she said. She was right. Sorry didn't do that. But I also knew that guilt functioned like a wedge if you let it. You could give until you dissolved. Or you could learn to say no without letting the world call you a villain for it. In the evenings, when the light bent and the unit exhaled, I started to think about structural fixes. We needed an on-call rotation or a voluntary emergency pool, a short list of people who could be compensated for last-minute coverage. I spoke to a few nurses who were open to a paid float shift role. They were tired of mandates too. A few managers warmed to the idea, but bureaucracy moves as slow as molasses in winter. At home, I tried to explain to Marcus why I didn't go. He listened, then said, "I get burnout. But family emergencies are ... different." Leah called again and said, "If it were me and my mom, I'd expect my team to cover for me." There it was, an infinite mirror. The question of empathy isn't symmetric. The people who expect it of you often assume they'd do the same. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. I sat with the discomfort like something that needed tending. The team still glanced, still whispered. My badge light felt heavier. But sleep crept in at night easier than before. Boundaries, I thought, sometimes felt like parachutes, ugly, bulky. But saving the jump? 3 days after the call, Rachel's father stabilized. Word spread like careful wind. He wasn't out of the woods, but he wasn't fading either. Her posts, short, gracious, tearful, started circulating. People softened, then hardened again. Humans are inconsistent. On the 4th day, the unit manager scheduled a brief staff meeting. "We need to talk about expectations," she said. "This job requires teamwork, but we also need to be realistic." Her notes fluttered. I felt a chair's curve under me like a gentle accusation. "What would change things?" she asked, glancing at me and then around the room. As if covering calls like this was part of our culture if people assumed they'd help one another in extraordinary circumstances. The sentence sat in the room like a verdict. I'd become a case example in a rule someone wanted to make. I raised my hand, which felt absurdly formal. If extraordinary circumstances become, we assume people will cover, then we are running on unpaid emotional labor, I said. We need a system. We need an on-call list or additional compensation for last-minute coverage. Otherwise, you're asking people to sacrifice sleep safety without any concrete support. There were nods and a few tight smiles. A young nurse named Priya whispered, "I've done a double before. It wrecked my weekend," someone else said. "But what if we set up a volunteer list?" The manager scribbled it down. Maybe momentum budded. Maybe change arrived like bargaining. That night, a colleague, Tomas, who had always been easy with a joke, caught me on my way out. "Hey, Alina," he said. "Look, I get why you didn't go. But if you're open to picking up some shifts later this month to even things out, it'd show folks you're not just cold." His voice was careful. It had the tone of someone suggesting a bridge. I thought about it. I didn't want to capitulate to guilt by payment, but I also didn't want a livable life to be traded for a grudge. "Okay," I said. "I can take 1 weekend shift in 2 weeks. I can't be on call, but I can trade a day." The truth was, I wanted to be part of a team where favors were mutual, not coerced. The rumor mill does weird things. For a week, it sounded like my refusal was a moral failing of the sort that defined character. People misremembered details. She refused because she wanted to go to brunch, and details became myth. I wanted to correct them, but correction felt like justification. I was tired of standing in my own defense. At home, Leah and I made a pact. "Boundaries are a muscle," she said, making tea like it was a ritual of self-preservation. Practice. Small reps. Don't relent because the room shouts. Doing the weekend shift, I'd promised Tomas felt different than giving in because of pressure. It felt like a conscious currency exchange. Time for truce, with interest. It wasn't perfect, but sometimes peace requires rental payments. The day I worked that weekend, Nina came on shift past midnight and handed me a wrapped muffin like a white flag. "Sorry for snapping," she said. "We were short and it sucks. Thanks for taking the swap." "Thank you for holding it together," I said. "I know those doubles are a grind." We traded a few stories and something shifted like a minuscule tectonic plate. Not everything heals in one exchange, but small acts stack. There were also people who never softened. A coworker named Ben, who had once been my preceptor, treated me like a fiction. "You chose to pick yourself," he said in a hallway that smelled faintly of antiseptic. "That's your choice. But don't pretend this didn't hurt the team." I stopped trying to win hearts that had decided I was the villain. I focused on what I could do. Advocate for policy change. Offer limited swaps when it was feasible. And hold my line when it WASN single quotes. One afternoon, Rachel cornered me by the med supply room. Her eyes were raw, but steadier than the day she called. "I wanted to thank you for the sticky note," she said. My dad's still in recovery. She swallowed. I'm sorry for how that was handled. I shouldn't have made you feel like you had to drop everything. It wasn't an apology steeped in theatricality. It was a small, real thing. I hope he's okay, I said. She nodded. And ... if there's ever a time you need something, I'll cover you. We didn't make declarations about loyalty or character. We didn't embrace. But something in the air changed, from burning to smoldering embers that could, with care, cool. Weeks turned. Conversations I started about a voluntary emergency pool and compensatory pay for last-minute coverage found ears higher up. A pilot program for an on-call stipend rolled out, small at first. A few hours of pay for anyone who accepted a last-minute shift. It wasn't enough to fix systemic staffing woes, but it was a start. People came to me and said, "Thanks for pushing that." It felt odd to be thanked for what I saw as taking care of myself and my coworkers. The unit didn't become a utopia overnight. Nina and I still had mornings where we nodded politely and didn't pry. Ben remained an uneasy landmark. But there were fewer jokes in the break room about who was soft and who wasn't. Eventually, the mandatory double became less frequent because managers started tapping the volunteer list first, my boyfriend. Marcus and I had long conversations that weren't always comfortable. He told me his instinct was always to drop everything for family. I told him my instinct was to protect my capacity to do my job well. We found a line between our priorities. He came to understand that family emergency doesn't erase the need a person has to survive their work. He learned that my refusal wasn't about being heartless. It was about sustaining the heart I had to bring to other people. Once, months later, Rachel and I sat on a lunch break and laughed about something small. A patient who'd insisted on bringing his garden gnome into dialysis because it helped morale. We didn't promise forever. We didn't need to. We had a working, messy truce where people sometimes covered and sometimes didn't. But when they did, it was on clear terms. I still remember lying in my bed after that first call and feeling like the worst version of myself. The lesson wasn't that saying no was always right. The lesson was that the word no has consequences that must be accepted honestly. It's not enough to refuse and walk away. You must also be ready to hold whatever fallout comes. That meant offering what I could, the occasional swap, pushing for policy change. Leaning into a few acts of kindness that didn't cost my health. There will always be moments where the humane think and the safe thing will not be the same. That contradiction doesn't make you less compassionate. It makes you human. When someone asks me now, "Would you do it again?" I say, maybe. It depends on the mechanics. My exhaustion level, how many shifts I've worked, whether there's a viable, paid on-call option. I tell them what I learned. Boundaries don't exist in a vacuum. They have to be part of a system. And if your unit asks everything of you, but gives nothing back, something has to change. The anger in the hallways cooled into conversation. The conversation nudged policy. The policy started nudging culture. It was slow and uneven, and sometimes infuriating, but it was real. I traded a moment of guilt for a pattern that would protect other nurses, who came after me. If you're sitting on a couch and someone calls you at dawn with a breathless plea, you'll have to decide what kind of person you will be in that moment. There's no cheat code. But there are ways to make room for both compassion and self-preservation. Ask for a system that pays people for last-minute coverage. Build a culture where the volunteer list is not social pressure disguised as goodwill. Teach your team to be human and fair. And if you still say no, expect the hall to echo. Be ready for it. Then do the slow, practical work of making sure one refusal doesn't mean your isolation becomes permanent. I kept my day off that morning. I didn't go to yoga, I slept, and my apartment was still half clean. But I kept a small thing I had promised myself. A body that could come back to work the next day and still care. That's not heartless. It's possibly the only way I knew to keep my heart at all.